Air has to do with being social, intellectual, all of the kind of mental, heady stuff. Air is quite playful and light. It was considered to be cold and dry. Air is not so interested in material reality nor feelings. Air just wants to have a good time thinking about lots of different stuff. It's a very light element, it moves very fast, easily changeable. Welcome to Promethea Astrology. My name is Alina, and today we're talking about the elements, and specifically the air element and the air signs. Each zodiac sign is made up of 5 primary qualities, of which the elements are one. And I think it's really important to learn about the zodiac signs in terms of their elements. This way we can assign the traits that we notice in people or placements of each sign to the quality that corresponds with that. And I think this is important because if you are not able to trace your delineation for the sign to some core fundamental principle underneath of it, then you run the risk of simply stereotyping groups of people and saying, I met Sagittarius people that are like this, and this is how my experience of them is, and that means this is what Sagittarius is. But the reality of astrology is that we're all complex, multifaceted beings, and no one is simply one sign. Your sun sign is only one part of you. So we want to make sure we're able to trace the things that we notice in people to their corresponding astrological counterpoint. And so I'm making this series to kind of break down each of these core fundamental symbols and what they mean in astrology. So I've made a video on gender. Each zodiac sign has a gender, a quadruplicity, which is also known as a modality, which is whether or not the sign is at the beginning, middle, or end of a season. I also have made videos on each of the traditional planets, so you can also check out any of these videos to kind of take a deep dive into any of these foundational topics. And this way we have a good basis for the foundation of your astrological learning, and you can start to delineate and understand the intricacies and complexities of these things and make your own meaning out of them, which is ultimately going to be much more powerful than someone just telling you what each sign means. It's interesting, too, to know the origin of these qualities. So the zodiac, we're not really sure exactly how old it is. I believe the oldest record is something from like 4,500 BC, which is the Egyptian decans. There's some archaeology that reveals symbolism for the decans, very, very old from the Egyptian tradition. But these qualities of the elements, as far as we can tell, were not assigned to the zodiac until maybe the Hellenistic era. So this would be like the 1st or 2nd century CE. And there is a very fascinating explanation for how each element came to be assigned to the zodiac, which is maybe something I'll get into on a later date. But suffice it to say, for now, this is a very, very old concept. And you'll notice that there are elements in many different traditions. So there's elements in yoga philosophy, there's elements in Chinese medicine, there's elements in the tarot, there's different elemental symbolism in different Native American traditions. This is something that transcends culture in a sense. And much of the symbolism that humans have made out of these elements is similar across different cultures, which is very interesting to me. So air as an element. Air has to do with being social, intellectual, all of the kind of mental, heady stuff. Air is quite playful and light. It was considered to be cold and dry. Air is not so interested in material reality nor feelings. Air just wants to have a good time thinking about lots of different stuff. It's a very light element, it moves very fast, easily changeable. But this will depend on the other qualities of the zodiac signs as well. So we can dig into and kind of illustrate what it means to be air by looking at the different air signs in the zodiac. So first off, we have Gemini. And I think Gemini is probably the most exaggerated version of an air sign. It's mutable air. So each of the elements has a cardinal, fixed, or immutable version of itself. So there is Cardinal Air, Mutable Air, Fixed Air. There's Cardinal Earth, Mutable Earth, Fixed Earth, Cardinal Water, Mutable Water, Fixed Water, and cardinal fire, fixed fire, and mutable fire. So the modality assigned gives us lots of good information about it. So Gemini, mutable fire. Air already is quite mutable, light, changeable, and quick, fast moving. Gemini is also a sign ruled by Mercury, which is already a planet that's very oriented towards intellectual, heady, analytical things. So Gemini is a great illustration of air as an element. So qualities of Gemini that are quite airy. Gemini loves to think about stuff. Gemini is also the twins and can just think about any version of anything. So whereas the opposite sign, Jupiter, ruled Sagittarius, literally opposite in the zodiac, tends to have great conviction about certain things. Gemini enjoys looking at both sides of things. This is the twins. This is the nature of duality. Mercury is also sort of associated with left brain thinking, which can be this breaking things down into black and white and not necessarily judging them on their moral principle or their ethos, but just considering what makes the most sense. And so Gemini has a lot of fun thinking about things. Gemini also likes to make jokes. Mercury and air can be both quite playful and humorous. So Gemini has lots of fun, wants to do everything. As a mutable air sign, it's all over the place. Gemini likes to have lots of different hobbies, lots of different interests, moving around pretty quickly, doesn't really stick with one thing too long per se, but maybe might return back to it, maybe not, depends on the rest of the placements there. Gemini also has a great social intelligence, tends to be quite agile socially, although whether or not this Gemini placement that we're talking about, whether that's your Gemini Sun or Gemini Venus or what have you, will kind of depend on the other planets that it's relating to. So a well-placed Gemini placement, a happy Gemini, will be able to really just play the social scene in any way that it needs to sort of get what needs to be done. Gemini, as the twins, is kind of able to step into any role that you might need. So this is a great superpower, but also can be quite challenging for people sometimes when you might be confused about, well, what is your actual nature? Are you just playing a role here, or do you actually believe in what you're saying right now? Is this just what you think you need to be in this context, or is this truly you? Because I've seen you be in a very different way before. So are you just kind of being in the shadow side if it's not a well-placed Gemini placement, or there's some kind of more challenging planet relating to this Gemini placement? Then we can get a Gemini that can get more into potentially being manipulative or playing the scene to meet their end and not really so concerned about the feelings or the effects of others. And this is sort of, again, the nature of air in a way, where air is not so emotionally present, not so much caring about the feelings, but just interested in what's possible and thinking about things. So as a Mercury ruled sign, as an air sign, Gemini is able to learn things really quickly, able to do lots of different things, very skilled, good at lots of stuff. Mercury is also kind of working with the hands, and so there can be, with the air Mercury sign, sort of an intelligence around craftiness. Sometimes Geminis can be quite crafty, like to build things, make things, arts and things, or it can be more analytical, reading lots of stuff, maybe writing. Mercury also rules communication, so speech can also be a superpower, and having a way of speaking that's quite engaging or even charismatic, and lots of jokes can be a part of that too. And so as a part of the social, playful nature of Gemini, air, not water. Water is more into the depths and going deep into things. Gemini just wants to kind of be on the surface, look at lots of different stuff, play around, see what's out there. And sometimes this kind of airy nature can come off as a little bit cold in a way. Air can be quite impersonal. Interested in ideas, not interested in feelings. So sometimes Gemini can be a little cold. And although there is a social superpower, oftentimes I find Geminis as well really need their alone time at the same time. And some Geminis can even be fairly introverted in a sense, where they like to be thinking on their own and in their own kind of analytical world. And it'll depend on all of the other placements there. But social butterfly is sort of the stereotype, but that's not always the way that it looks. Next, we have Libra. Libra is Cardinal Air. So this is the beginning of fall Libra, ruled by Venus now. So a Venus ruled cardinal air sign, very different version of air. So cardinal, beginning of the season, this is the nature of kind of influencing, I think of the keyword for cardinal, kind of like initiating some kind of experience in their environment, influencing the environment in some ways, getting something started. And as an air sign, cardinal air, ruled by Venus, which is our planet of beauty, love, romance. And of course, you can watch my whole video on Venus to learn more about Libra, or also my whole video on Mercury to learn more about Gemini. But the Venus version of air is going to have this aesthetic and social intelligence. Gemini, of course, has a social intelligence as well, but Venus is also a planet of relationships and friendship, romance and love. So the superpower of Libra is really creating pleasant social experiences and also creating pleasant environments. Oftentimes Libra can be like the archetype of the interior designer or the fashionista. So as a Venus ruled sign, very oriented towards beauty, but because it's an air Venus sign, it's more like the intelligence of aesthetics. Whereas Taurus, as an earth Venus sign, is more about the physical embodied pleasure that Venus wants to bring. So it's like the more earthly pleasure side of Venus. Whereas Libra, the air version of Venus, is going to have more of that social aesthetic, kind of that heady, a little bit less felt material version of Venus. So Libra as the scales as well. Can air sign be thinking a lot about kind of the pros and cons of things? Libra is very oriented towards fairness and really wanting to make sure that things are fair. And this is a lovely impulse to have, and also can make it quite difficult for them to decide things sometimes, weighing the pros and cons, the scale here. They have the rep of being quite indecisive sometimes, maybe overthinking some little choices from time to time. And that can sometimes also be related to this airy social nature that Libra has, where they're quite concerned with and attuned to the people in their environment. What's best for you? What do you think about this? What would be best for us? How would be the best situation for the collective here? Like, you know, trying to weigh everyone's feelings and the pros and cons of how to optimize things, which is great, but can also be a little bit stifling sometimes if it gets out of control. The other sort of issue sometimes Libra can face, being so oriented towards social harmony and peace as a Venus ruled sign, an air ruled sign, they can sometimes get into a little bit of people pleasing, opposite to Mars, right? So Libra is opposite to Aries. Aries is the warrior, very quick to assert themselves and make their wants, needs, desires, projects known. And that is not going to be the nature of Libra. Libra is going to have a hard time kind of just coming forth boldly and saying what needs to be said, especially when it's going to be a challenging thing, or it might cause some disharmony, or it might induce some conflict. Then it's going to be really hard for Libra to assert themselves and say no and ruffle the feathers that might need to be ruffled sometimes in order to assert their needs and get what they need out of a situation or a person. And then lastly, we have Aquarius, fixed air. This is the middle of winter. So Aquarius, again, very different version of air. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is our planet of discipline, structure, mastery, time, isolation. Can be kind of like the archetype of the cold, punishing father, scarcity, decrease. Very challenging planet. And then the nature of air being fixed, this is probably the least sort of natural modality for air to take. You could think of a cloud though, right? Where it's air, but it seems like it has physical form and is fixed in some sense. So Aquarius as a Saturn ruled air sign, fixed also. Aquarius tends to be quite oriented towards mental structures. Saturn structure, air, mental. And this can be usually in a social way, again, an air sign, and also quite humanitarian. So Aquarius is also the water bearer, the bringer of water to the gods. So Aquarius does tend to be quite concerned about the collective and what would be the optimal ideology for us to collectively agree on and practice in order to benefit human nature the most. And as an air sign, Aquarius is not so necessarily interested in boots on the ground enacting that ideology, but more interested in kind of thinking about it and developing that from a more kind of like thought experiment perspective. And again, although it's quite humanitarian and like concerned about the collective and what would be best for everyone and what kind of social systems and structures would be best for everyone collectively, it's more interested, Aquarius, in humanity abstractly, air sign, rather than the concrete one-on-one, tell me about your feelings, what's going on for you today. That's more kind of like the watery version of caring. But the air version is going to be much more abstract and less personal. And Aquarius, as a Saturn ruled sign, does also tend to like to be a little bit isolated or removed from situations, or it's not always necessarily that it's a choice. Like often for maybe Aquarius rising, sometimes this isolation can be something that is not choiceful, but just something that kind of happened to them based on circumstance. But oftentimes Aquarius finds themselves as the black sheep or the odd one out in a situation. And this can be, again, intentional. Sometimes Aquarius will really enjoy being different and seek out people and situations that are like quite different or antithetical to their nature. But sometimes it can just be a result of circumstance and kind of a source of hardship. And that feeling of being different can be painful as well. It depends, and probably different things at different points in time for them. As a sign ruled by Saturn, which is Lord of Time, Aquarius can also be very interested in the future, and futurism is kind of like the alien or the sci-fi futurist or something like that. And that kind of goes back to the airy nature as well, really enjoying to think about the future and what could happen and what's possible for the future and what could we come up with and what structures and systems might exist in a future utopia. That's the type of thought experiment that an Aquarius generally enjoys going down. Whereas Gemini, as the twins, might be more interested in playing devil's advocate for different things and having a conversation and making it, just playing both sides just to see how we can flesh out an idea. Whereas Libra will be interested in creating social harmony and having a conversation that is pleasurable and fun and peaceful, where there can be a nice, easeful, relaxed, harmonious social environment amongst friends or something. That's the type of social intelligence that Libra's bringing. And then the fixed nature of Aquarius, fixed air. So sometimes then the nature of fixed signs can be a little bit of resistance to change, a little bit rigid, and because it's air, might be a little bit rigid in their ideology. So they spend a lot of time thinking about things. They think they have it right. So they might not be so open to or interested in or entertaining alternative perspectives, which is something that Gemini, as a mutable air sign, will be very interested in doing. Let's hear from lots of people about lots of things. Not that I necessarily agree with you, even though I might be acting like it. There was the Gemini trickster nature. And Libra, as the Venus air sign, might be more interested in having a conversation about design or interior design or what is beautiful or aesthetically pleasing. How should we dress? How should we live? How can we make our lives and our relationships beautiful? And Libra will have more of a influence. They'll be interested in sort of shaping the social environment towards harmony and will potentially speak or influence the group in a way towards social harmony, whereas Gemini may have an influence that they're trying to bring, but it's mostly just kind of like playful and social and here and there and just having a good time. That's the mutable nature. And then the fixed nature, also ruled by Saturn, is just kind of more Aquarius removed in their own world, having their own thoughts, not so interested in necessarily asserting an influence. Like surely in a conversation they will be happy to expound on their beliefs, but it's not as social in a sense. Aquarius tends to kind of more be off on their own as a Saturn ruled sign, doing their own thing, living the way that they think makes sense to them, which can look quite eccentric and zany to outsiders, but that doesn't really faze them. And sometimes people will even think that Aquarius is like quite cool because they're all different and unique. And oftentimes this isn't necessarily intentional on the part of the Aquarius. They're just doing what makes sense to them and not really concerned about external social pressures or things like that. But that sometimes has the results of people thinking that they're cool, even though that's not really what they're going for. But all of these air signs do have that social nature where they can be pretty good at like playing with social capital and like navigating social environments and structures if they so choose. Aquarius probably least likely to be doing that, but Gemini and Libra surely would be quite adept at something like that. So that's pretty much the airy nature of those signs. And it's also interesting to note the geometry of the air signs. So if you look at a zodiac wheel, which by the way is available for download on my website, if you would like, this graphic has so much information that you can learn about the zodiac and all of these different qualities. It's very helpful as you're getting started in your astrological learning. So feel free to go to the link in the description below to download this if you want for free. But you can see here that there are these 3 air signs that create a triangle. And so every 4 signs, the same element repeats. This divides the circle into 3 because there's 12 zodiac signs divided by 4 elements equals 3. So we have a triangle, which means if you have all 3 air signs present in your chart, then that would make a complete triangle. But the nature of these elements, these shared elemental signs creating a triangle, is significant. So the trine in astrology is the most positive, harmonious aspect. So when planets are trine to each other, that indicates that they share the same element. And this means that they have both the same gender and element, actually, because all air signs are masculine and all water signs are feminine, all earth signs are feminine, all fire signs are masculine. So the way the ancient astrologers understood the zodiac and aspectual nature, the literal translation of aspect is to witness. So they understood the aspects to be as if the planets could see each other. And because they could see each other, they had a relationship. And this trine relationship is a very positive, harmonious one. And that's because they share nature. They can see each other, they can relate to each other, they can understand each other. And sharing an element, this is a very easy way to see and relate. And that's why this trine aspect has this nature of ease and flow. So from a synastry perspective, you might find that if you have a lot of air signs, you get along well with other air signs. That's one way you could sort of interpret this. And if you have all 3 air signs present in your chart, and I would say specifically if one of the 7 traditional planets or your rising sign, not just anything. So I personally wouldn't include the asteroids or the other angles, the nodes, lots of fortune, all of that. I would just include the 7 traditional planets and the rising sign. But if 3 of those are in each of these 3 air signs, then you have a grand air trine. And this is a gift. This is a very auspicious and positive aspect configuration to have in your birth chart. And it essentially indicates that you have the air superpower. You have every version of air present in your chart. So you have kind of mastery over this social intellectual realm. So this could be kind of like the archetype of the genius. But the other thing about the nature of the trine is that because it's so positive and harmonious and easeful, sometimes people can really sleep on it. So oftentimes people might take for granted the gifts that they have. And so even though you may have a grand air trine, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have actualized it or acted on it or integrated it in a way that you are then taking out into the material world and externalizing in some way. So it's a gift. It might be latent or it might be actualized, but you are the intellectual, the genius, the socialite. And it will depend on which houses these air placements are for you and also which planets are involved as far as what area of life you have these gifts in and the parts of yourself that you use to access them. And I think I'll do a follow-up series soon where I kind of dive into each of the grand trines and break that down more so you can kind of get a sense for how to take advantage of that if it is something that you have. And even though I don't personally count when the grand trine is composed of things like asteroids or angles and what have you, you might find that it does still resonate even though it's not the placements that I mentioned. So look into it. See if you have something in Aquarius, Libra, and Gemini. That would be a grand trine, grand air trine specifically. Or you could have a grand trine in one of the other elements. It would be a grand earth trine if you had placements in Capricorn, Virgo, and Taurus. It would be a grand fire trine if you had placements in Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius. And it would be a grand water trine if you had placements in Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. So you could check that out for yourself and see if that's a thing for you. And that is all I think that I'll say about the air signs for now. But if you have air placements, please in the comments let us know if and how this resonated. If you are an air person, then you have authority on that sign. Let us know what is the airy nature that shows up for you and how. And also, of course, if you would like to get a consultation with me, I am a consulting astrologer, so you can head to my website. I currently, at the time of this recording, December 2025, am running a sale on digital gift cards. So if you wanted to give your friend an astrology reading for Christmas, that could be a very unique and fun experience for them that they cannot throw away and they will not forget. So 20% off on astrology readings for this month. If you're seeing this at the time that I'm releasing it, you might take advantage of that. I offer 60 or 90-minute consultations, either focusing on the birth chart as a symbol of who you are, 60 minutes, or also getting into timing in the 90-minute consultation where we can talk about your future, when you might experience career peaks and what's coming up in the next year and things like that. So feel free to check out those links in my description to learn more about my offerings. And of course, I would recommend that you next watch the videos on the planetary ruler of the sign that you're here for. So if you're here because you're a Libra, then I would recommend you watch my video on Venus. If you're here because you are a Gemini, I would recommend you watch my video on Mercury. And if you're here because you are an Aquarius, I'd recommend you watch my video on Saturn. And or you could also check out the different modalities. So Libra Cardinals, I have a video on that. Gemini Mutable, I have a video on the Mutable Signs. And Aquarius Fixed, I have a video on the fixed signs, so you might check that out as well. And if you live in Philly, I do offer in-person workshops. At some point, I think I'll try to make the workshops online offerings as well, but for now, they're in person, so come say hi. I'm out here. Thank you so much for being here. Be well.